And I noticed that every 10 seconds or so, this guy would take his hands off the side of the truck and just kind of stand up. And I put them back on. So the third time, I put my hand and grabbed his shirt and forcefully put him on the truck. And both of his hands went down instantly. And he grabbed a Browning high power 9mm, fully loaded, one in the chamber. And luckily, he had trouble. The shirt was kind of long, like an untucked Western shirt, pearl snap. I'll never forget it. Skinny Mexican dude. And he's trying to pull the shirt with his hand and get the gun out with the right hand.
Okay, can you introduce yourself for me, please?
Yeah, my name is Bobby Minchew, or Robert Lee Minchew Jr.
Okay.
Dad was senior. I'm 55 years old. I live in Centerville, Texas, about halfway between Houston and Dallas. I grew up in the Houston area, resided in the North Houston, North Harris County area most of my life until I retired from law enforcement. And the wife and I pursued our dream of living in the country. So we now live on 21 beautiful acres here in Leon County, just outside of Centerville, Texas.
Bobby, how much law enforcement time did you have before you retired?
30 and a half, give or take a few weeks.
30 and a half. So lifelong Texas resident, born in Houston?
Yes, born in downtown Houston, lived close to the city as a young kid, and then we moved out of Houston to the Conroe area, kind of Porter Conroe area in Montgomery County. And that's where I went to school most of the time, played baseball, football, hunted, fished. I ended up being the oldest of 6 children, but actually one of them, the youngest one, my brother Jesse, was born while I was in the military. So there's a 18-year spread between us. And by coincidence, he's a detective with the Conroe Police Department, which is about an hour and 15 minutes south of here where we're sitting right now. So,
any background of law enforcement in your family?
yeah, but nothing positive. Most involved police chats or back seats of patrol cars. No. I had no law enforcement influence or family or friends or, just getting interviewed about rocks thrown and things like that as a kid, or maybe the parents arguing and getting a talking to and some minor stuff. But no, I had no inclination about law enforcement, had no interest, really had no thoughts either way. It's not like I said, oh, I'm never going to be a cop, or, oh, I hate the police. It was just not something I thought about, as a kid.
What did your parents do?
My dad was he did custom duct work, which air conditioning ducts, but, for big buildings like the convention centers and the hospitals. And he was a supervisor. I'm not sure. He did a lot of big buildings where he laid out the duct work. He worked hard for his money. My mom worked off and on, but with up to eventually 6 kids, she did a lot of homemaking and being at home, but she was very smart, very good she used to do data entry for big companies. She worked with drawings, and I can't remember if it's oil field type companies, with CAD type stuff. She did a lot of different jobs over the years, but mostly just being mom.
Any priority of education growing up?
I would like to say yeah, but it was more like, did you do your homework? And then I would say yeah. I was not the best student. All my teachers liked me because I was quiet, I was shy. My mom said that kindergarten or first grade teachers thought I was mentally challenged because I did not talk. And they would talk to her about it, thinking I needed special ed or something. And it's like, what do you mean he doesn't talk? A kid reads Spanish, English, can do math. He's been reading since he was 3 or 4. And maybe he just don't like you. I don't know. And I was, for me to be able to talk to you right now compared to how I was as a child up until probably almost into my late teens, 20s is just amazing. I didn't talk. didn't like people really, didn't talk to people that much.
Where do you think that switched? Where do you think the ability to talk to people finally came about?
Just the confidence I gained from, getting out of this little environment, and then going into the Marine Corps at the age of 17. And then, next thing you know, I'm teaching college classes in my my 40s, I think. And I don't know. I really don't know. I think it was just growth and maturity, maybe. I don't know. But if you would have asked me in middle school or even high school, I took a speech class, one of my first college classes, and almost had a heart attack, getting up in front of people and giving a speech, and I was just petrified. But eventually, due to work and due to having to interview people at work and things like that, I actually kind of started to like it and saw it as a challenge, and I've done public speaking, I've done teaching, I've spoke at funerals. I don't know. It's an amazing transformation, and I can't put a finger on it other than maybe I just like to hear myself talk now because I was quiet for a couple decades.
So you mentioned you were 17 when you joined the Marines. So a couple questions there. First of all, at 17, do your parents have to sign off on you to join the Marines?
Yes, yeah, you have to be 18 to go on your own. So
okay.
Yeah, my dad was a Vietnam vet. My mom, I don't remember. I don't think she wanted me to leave, but I mean, I'm sure she was smart enough to know that I needed to get out of the crazy house. It would get a little crowded, and yeah, I mean, I was a little different kid. My curtains in my bedroom from the time I was probably 14 or 15 was a full-size Marine Corps flag. Didn't really have a Marine Corps influence. My dad was in the Army. He was a combat medic in Vietnam, Purple Heart recipient, wounded in combat, Army Commendation Medals for saving lives and all that. So I think I picked up wanting to maybe emulate that type of service from him. But the Marine Corps, if they're good at one thing, it's advertising. And we're looking for a few good men. And I was a quiet little shy boy. And I said, maybe I can flip a switch. And yeah, my Marine Corps recruiter came out to the house and he was trying to find the house. I think this is before cell phones. So this would have been 87, 88. And he called from a payphone or something. He's like, I couldn't find your house. I'm going to have to go. I told him where to go. I said, there's a Marine Corps flag in the window. When you turn, you can't miss it. I saw that. I was like, hello. So yeah, I turned 18 in boot camp actually. So I was barely, I went to boot camp July 31st, I think, and I turned 18 on August 8th. And of course, my girlfriend at the time sent me a big birthday card, and the drill instructors opened it, saw it, and I had to do like 8 million push-ups to get my card and letter. So anyway, but no, yeah, the Marine Corps was probably the best thing for me. I was undisciplined, probably a little smart alecky, and that didn't last long. That lasted about 2 hours in San Diego, California, at Marine Corps Recruit Depot, San Diego. And yeah, I was in for a world of hurt.
Yeah, what was the shock value for you? You're 17, you've never been through anything, and then now you're here. How was that?
It was hard at first, but I thrived on it. I mean, I loved it. Now not that I didn't have people telling me what to do, but I really didn't. I mean, I was kind of on my own as a teenager, because you got all these younger siblings, and I was working and I wasn't home a lot. I had a girlfriend over here and I had a job over here, and I had a truck that broke down half the time, but had a couple friends that hung out with. So, but now I just had this structure. I don't know if I was craving it or what, but knowing that I had to get up at this time and go run or go work out and then do this and that. And I lucked into a really good unit, an infantry unit. Met some good friends. I mean, some of them I talked to. Yeah, one of my best friends from the Marines was actually here at the house, I believe, last year. He's from Topeka, Kansas. Hey, Ron. Yeah, there was, I don't know, the Marine Corps just gave me what I was needing, like a little discipline, structure, brotherhood. adventure. I hadn't been anywhere.
Yeah,
First
you got
time
you got to serve all over the world.
Yeah. First time I was ever on a plane was from Houston to California to go to boot camp, and I don't think I'd ever been to an airport before, much less got on a plane. So it was a big deal, to leave home. Didn't know anybody that had ever been to California or knew anything about California. And I did well in boot camp. I was an expert marksman. My physical fitness wasn't that great when I got there, but when I left, I was 19-minute 3-mile run, 25, 30 pull-ups, 90 sit-ups in 2 minutes. Now I can do about a tenth of that. I'm just short for my weight. But no, it was the perfect thing for me at the perfect time, and it changed my life. I had some rough times in the Marine Corps, like everybody, boot camp and overseas, and missing family a little, homesick. But yeah, if it wasn't for the Marines, I'd probably be, I don't know what I hate to even think what I would be doing, because I would lack that structure, discipline, work ethic, strive to get education. I mean, the Marine Corps I had no interest in college, not that there was any money for college, but halfway through my enlistment, I started taking correspondence courses. I went to some classes on campus. I broke my leg really bad when I was 21. I guess I had about a year left, and I was like, man, they got college classes right down the road, at lunchtime. So I would go and take college classes. So I got out of the Marines with a couple semesters of college with a real desire to go back to college at some point. But then life happened, and kids and work and all that stuff. So it got delayed.
Why did you served in the Marines from 88 to 92. If you enjoyed the Marines as much as you did, why'd you end up getting out?
That's a complicated question. I had done everything I wanted to do. I thought I wanted to re-enlist. I thought about it, but at this point in 1992, I had 2 young boys. One was born in 91 and one was born in 92, right before I got out. The money was horrible. I mean, even with their extra pay for being married and, base housing and all that, it just, trying to live in California or wherever they could send you anywhere, and, I just, I don't know. I think I was ready to get out. Some of my best friends had already gotten out, either a few months before me or were planning to get out after I got out. And my unit was deploying again, and I didn't have enough time left to go back overseas, which I probably would have enjoyed, except for missing the family. But so they sent me to another unit. I was with 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, and for my entire enlistment. And then the last 6 months, they moved me to 1st Battalion, 5th Marines, because they had just gotten back from overseas. And I just kind of dwelled there for 6 months, not really enjoying it. I didn't know anybody. I wasn't having a good time. The enlistment rate for infantry, which I enjoyed, that's infantry, if you don't know, is, that's why I joined the Marines. I'd enjoyed the Marines to be a typist, a Remington Raider, or chairborne ranger. I joined the Marines to be an infantryman. Ended up being a 60 millimeter mortarman. Served on the battalion pistol and rifle team for a little while, doing some shooting. West Pacific deployment, what we call the West Pac, and then Desert Shield, Desert Storm. I just had a blast, to be honest. Just had a blast, and I didn't want it to end, but I knew it was kind of ending. There wasn't any new wars on the horizon, and my buddies were leaving and getting jobs at Goodyear plants and going to college and all that. And I already had 2 kids and a wife, so it was time to get out. So I started applying for police agencies. Actually, I applied for the Houston Police Department while I was still on active duty. I came home on terminal leave. You have leave built up, and they'll let you take it. So I think I had 30 days terminal leave. And somebody said, Houston Police Department's not really hiring white guys right now. And that was true. They were hiring Vietnamese, and I'm trying to think. There was 2 different specific, not gender, what am I thinking, ethnicities that they were hiring. I don't remember, but they were hiring a lot of Spanish speakers and Vietnamese. because of the different population demographics that were increasing in Houston at the time. And then somebody said, you might want to apply to Harris County Sheriff's Office. They're building a new jail, and they're going to have to hire like 700 people. And when you get hired, you get on the list to go to the academy. Well, I just wanted the job. I didn't think about that. I ended up making the right decision.
But Bobby, up until you had mentioned when you were younger, you had interactions with police that, I guess maybe not negative, not positive one way or another. But why in the Marines did you decide, hey, I should start applying for these law enforcement? What was it? What happened?
In my naive mind at that time, I didn't think I could do anything else. And there was a couple different reasons. I wanted a job that was not boring. I didn't want to work in a warehouse or a factory or a desk job. I wanted something that was maybe close to what I had in the Marine Corps, which was like a brotherhood, what we called esprit de corps, where you actually are working and fighting and things with people that you care about. You're not necessarily doing it because of Old Glory and Uncle Sam. You're doing things and for your buddies to the left and right of you. That's just the way it was. And I knew I was going to miss that. That was what I was going to miss, I just because of how tight we were. I have 3 initials tattooed on my ankle of, friends that were with me over there. And that's just how it was. It wasn't like a normal job where you see these guys for 8 hours. I mean, you lived with them, either out, sleeping on a poncho in a poncho liner, or back at the barracks at base, or flying off somewhere. So I was really going to be let down, I felt, by civilian life and civilian jobs. And I was young. I was just barely, I turned 22 a week after I got out of the Marines. So I was still young in law enforcement. It's not like I had this burning desire to be a police officer, like I told you. It was more, it had benefits. The pay still sucked, but it was enough to survive. But you had insurance, which was a big deal. You had a retirement, which I didn't really, at that age, you're not really thinking about pension, but I'm glad that I got into an agency that had an awesome pension. So I really didn't have anything else. And I got a taste of working a crappy job. My wife at the time's dad was a manager at a uniform company where you drive these big vans full of uniforms, and you go to shops and stores and you pick up their dirty clothes and then replace them with clean clothes. And you pick up 2,000 greasy shop towels at a mechanic shop and you replace them with 2,000 clean. It took me about 8 hours of that to realize, and even in that short time, the owner of that place asked me if I would stay because he heard I wasn't happy. He said, you could be running this place in, a year or two. He said, you just, you got it. And I was like, what do I got? What do I have? He's like, I don't know. He said, but you figure out these things in minutes. And some of these people have been here 2 years and they haven't figured it out, And I'm like, I said, I'll be honest with you, sir. This is not what I want to do with my life. I'm applying for law enforcement or trying to go back to school full time and work part time. I said, I'm not really sure what I want to do, but I know this isn't it, but I really appreciate you giving me this job. And I worked my butt off, 12, 14 hours a day in an unair conditioned van in the Texas heat, picking up people's dirty clothes. But it was a waiting game, every time my beeper would go off for you young kids, I don't know, about the size of a VCR on your belt. And it beeps when somebody wants you to call them. But anytime my beeper would go off or the home phone would ring, I would just pray, please let it be a police department. I don't care who. And
Bobby, when you look back on your 30-and-a-half-year career with law enforcement, do you think you got that esprit de corps that you did from the military?
In a few of my assignments, yes. Most of them, no.
Okay.
Large agency, Harris County Sheriff's Office was, I believe, the 4th largest sheriff's office outside of Cook County, LA County, and one of the counties around New York. I'm not sure. But anyway, 4,000 employees. But yeah, in general, no, I didn't. But in specific assignments, I did have really good guys that I worked with, different task forces or different assignments on patrol. I had some units that brought back some good memories of doing crazy things and getting in trouble and, putting bad guys away.
In 92, when you were hired by the Harris County Sheriff's Office, how big was the department? Let me ask you this. Were they big enough that they could have their own homicide unit, their own narcotics unit, their own special victims unit?
Yes. Yeah, they did. They had all those units, understaffed. Believe me, everybody was understaffed. And because the focus was on the jail, Harris County was, the sheriff's responsibility, not a police chief, but an elected sheriff's responsibility primarily is care, custody, and control of inmates. And patrol was kind of secondary at the time. So think of downtown Houston. You've got 50, 60 police agencies in Harris County that are bringing their prisoners to the Harris County jail. And they just kept building more jails. And that's one of the reasons I got hired when I did was they had already filled up this jail and they filled up this jail and this jail's now outdated and it's got asbestos and rats. And so they built this big, beautiful jail on Buffalo Bayou in downtown Houston. And they were hiring just a mass hire, In fact, I heard they were finishing up background checks after you were hired. That's why a lot of my coworkers just disappeared one day. Hey, what happened to Dave? He had some open warrants or he had a felony conviction.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was crazy. But they were just mass hiring to open this jail and staff it with 3 shifts, and, eventually Harris County today is outsourcing inmates because they filled up all the jails and they keep adding buildings. And now they've got inmates in Mississippi, Louisiana, different areas that they're paying to house their inmates because they don't have enough housing. We're talking 12, 13,000 inmates. I think at one time it was at 15,000. But
so people still go to jail in Texas.
Oh yeah, they go to jail. Not for long though. And that's one of the reasons the population has actually dipped down from what it probably has been in the past is because of the criminal justice system in Harris County has went more, we'll just say inmate friendly. Lots of bonds on people that should be in jail for murder. And
that surprises me in Texas. Why do you think that is?
You just have to look at the big city mindset.
Okay.
And it's a combination of money too. How much money does it take to house an inmate? It takes a lot of money to house an inmate, to physically house the inmate, and to pay people to watch them. And you have to have a specific ratio of staff, jailers to inmates. And when you don't meet that, the Texas Jail Commission can shut you down or censure you or fine. Well, I don't know if they fine you or whatever, but they give you a few warnings and then, there's consequences for not maintaining that staffing. So what do? They start hiring 18-year-olds that have never worked anywhere except maybe, video game rental store or something. And now they're guarding inmates and it can be a recipe for disaster. But the sheriff's office has done well trying to balance that fine line with staffing and budget. It's a tough road to hoe, especially when you have, we'll say, maybe not so law enforcement friendly people controlling the purse strings of the county. I don't want to get too far into that. I could be here all day. So.
What was did you find any benefit working in the jail when you later on go on patrol?
Yeah, while I was there, I hated it. But yeah, looking back, and I think any sheriff deputy that worked the jail will agree that you learn more about crooks and bad guys and dealing with people in the jail. It's almost a safety thing. I mean, I really feel like lives have been saved in interpersonal reactions between police officers and people out on the streets because of what they learned in the jail. And we actually took a little class, like they would pull you out of your cell whenever you were new and send you to a 4-hour class called Games Inmates Play. I'll never forget it. And I'd been there like 2 weeks. And, I got my little white shirt, civilian jailer uniform, and it says sheriff's office on the patch. I think I'm pretty much a SWAT operator at this point, and it broke up a few fights. And, man, I went to this class, and they actually, I think they had a couple of inmates come in and talk. Like they were trustees that had been to prison, and, they would tell stories. And then you watch these videos of jailers getting sucker punched. And I mean, it was eye opening. After that class, pretty much everybody you talk to, you realize they're running some kind of game, even if it's, good evening, boss. How you doing? And when you first get hired, you're like, what a nice guy. Just, man, that's the kind of guy I'd like to have over for Thanksgiving. But if you engage the next night, hey, boss, how you doing tonight? You all right? You look a little stressed. Oh, I'm good. What's up? Man, I got this toothache. You think you could get me a Tylenol? And being a new guy, you're like, well, shoot, I've had a toothache before. That's horrible. Let me call down to the nurse, and then, it builds from there. And if you don't cut it off, they get their hooks in you, and we had so many people that were fired or investigated or actually even went to jail for bringing in contraband and helping somebody escape, or or they let somebody into the pod to use the phone as a favor because their mom's dying for the 19th time, and they get beat up or whatever, I could just tell you stories for days about the jail and the games inmates play, which went back to that class. But yeah, to answer your question, invaluable experience. You're dealing with people that have already been arrested. Most of them have been in the system multiple times. Just listening to them talk, you learn a lot. And if you're a small town kid like me, grew up and didn't deal with people like this, even in the Marine Corps, you're not dealing with people that are convicts and, that could probably just kill you just as soon as look at you, so you learn a lot about watching your back. I got into a few scrapes in there. I learned more. I also learned a lot about employees, who you can trust, who you can't trust, who's going to run away when you need help, and who's just going to want to go yell for help instead of helping you. And you learn a lot, and I think it helped me. Like I said, I was there quite a while before I got out and went to patrols. But
Yeah, so how long are you in the jail before you go on patrol?
let's see. I got hired in November of 92, went to patrol in September of 95. So almost 3 years. But, once you get certified as a deputy, then you start working side jobs, and, you're studying for, maybe we had a patrol test you had to study for, a lot different than a police department where you get hired to be a patrolman. Harris County Sheriff's Office, you get hired to be a jailer. And if you meet the state requirements to be a peace officer, background, credit, education or military, whatever, then you're put on the academy list. And that's where I screwed up, or I thought I screwed up, because when I got hired, I was like number 800 on the academy list. And if you did the math where they're taking 40 or 50 people at a time, I was looking at a jail career for a long time. And I was really torn. A lot of my coworkers were leaving, to go to other agencies that would put you on patrol, and luckily the new sheriff that we got put out an order that, hey, the academy list is back up for years, and we're still hiring people. We're going to open up this opportunity for people to go to the community college academies, and I caught a lot of flack over my years for not being a real Harris County Academy graduate. But, after surviving the Marine Corps and my household, and I know people that went through the academy that were not the best officers, so that never really impressed me. But so I worked full-time night shift at the jail, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. But before my shift, I went to the academy right down the road at University of Houston downtown campus, which was right across the bayou from the jail. So pretty much walking distance. So I would have to go downtown at about 4, maybe 5 p.m. and go to the academy part-time, and then try to study all that while I was working in the jail, and then go home and try to do the family thing. It was stressful 6-month academy, instead of like the other alternative would have been to wait 3 or 4 years and then go to the academy full-time. as my job assignment, you know. But anyway, it helped me get out to the streets a lot quicker by going to that University of Houston Academy. So I don't regret it. I would have been in the jail a lot longer. So.
When you finally get to patrol, how long are your FTO programs out there?
Mine was 3 weeks. Some of my coworkers that had gotten to patrol a little bit before me had 1 week. Luckily, I had taken it upon myself to do what we call the second man program. If you were a certified deputy on your day off from the jail, you could fill out some paperwork and a release and get your supervisor's signature, and you could go ride shifts, you know. So I went to the closest district where that I lived to, which was Northeast Harris County, the Humble substation, Humble, Texas, just a little town where our substation was. And I probably rode, I don't know, maybe 20 times over that period after I got my badge and the time I actually went to patrol. So I had a pretty good exposure to it. And the FTOs were also set up to give you leeway if you seem to show that you could take care of yourself. You know, you may not need to stay longer. You may be cut loose really quick. Hell, there were some people that did so much second man time that they actually filled out an FTO book riding, you know, second man, and they rode with an FTO. So when they did get the call, hey, you're going to patrol, they pretty much ready to hit the street, you know. I hadn't done that much, and I didn't ride with people that were FTOs, but I ended up actually becoming an FTO, and they kind of did away with that program, and they made it a little bit longer. So,
How old were you when you finally got on patrol?
let's see, 94. I guess I was 25 years old.
25, and we talked about this. You thought you looked about 18.
Yeah, I was young looking. I still can't grow a beard. Yeah, I was skinnier.
How was that though? Was it? Were you scared when you were finally on patrol by yourself?
There may have been a little bit on specific calls, but it was more just excitement. You know, I was finally getting back to a little more adrenaline junkie type status, which, you know, just a few years before that, I had been rappelling in Korea and helicopter assaults here and riding into Kuwait City on the back of an amphibious tractor, setting up my 60 millimeter mortar, putting rounds down the range. And then I'm sitting in a jail. Count time. 1, 2, 3. It's like, oh, my life's over. So getting to patrol and already having a taste of it from riding that second man time, you know, I was just raring to go.
And I think it's fair to say that you were just, at that point, you were addicted because you're loving the work. You're going to work sick. I mean, you're worried about actually missing things, that something might happen out there.
Yeah, I hated missing work. I felt we were so shorthanded. Then again, like in the Marine Corps, that esprit de corps, that brotherhood, you know, you may not be the best of friends with these guys, but you don't want them shorthanded. If you've got 4 patrol districts, A, B, C, and D, with only a few people in each one, and you call in sick or whatever, you know, you're letting those people down. And that's the way we felt. And that was, like I've mentioned, that was the closest to that kind of Marine Corps camaraderie that I had, was that group of guys that you worked with. And it was kind of like a war zone where we patrolled. I mean, it was, the Aldine area was just riddled with gangs and crime and drugs. And then you had some rural areas that also had a lot of drugs and crime, but it was all kind of spread out. But you learned a lot, and you learned how to talk to people, games inmates play. You learn to diffuse situations when you're outnumbered. You learn just to listen to the dispatcher's tone and the notes of the call, and maybe get some backup en route instead of waiting until you're getting monkey stomped in the middle of the street to call for backup. Just pulling over a car that you didn't feel good about. All of our crew would let dispatch know the vehicle's occupied. Even if you said one time, just the fact that the other deputies heard you say the vehicle's occupied, regardless of whether you said 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 times. That was our code. Hey, I don't mean to sound like a puss, but could you kind of head this way? Because the guy's reaching, or he didn't pull over right away. He's just, something that would trigger your spider senses, which developed really quick because of the number of traffic stops and the number of calls that we had to run due to being short-handed in a highly populated, unincorporated area of Harris County. You've got all the people from the city coming in. You've got people from other areas coming in to different businesses, clubs to buy dope. You learn fast. I think I told you before we started that I probably learned more about police work in just a month or two where I work than I would have in a fully staffed, lots of police officers, safer area. You had to learn quick. So,
Any close calls?
yeah, lots of close calls. Lots of close calls. I was this technical term. It's a scientific term that researchers came up with. It's called a shit magnet. I could probably translate that in Spanish too. For some reason, I pull over a car just to give a guy a warning, and he takes off, or I'll walk up to a guy, just to see what's up, standing outside a store at 11 at night, and he's got a gun or a dope or wants to fight, it's just, people used to tease me at the stations like, man, I hate backing you up because then I got to go to the hospital and get stitches, and I'm sore for a week. I got to drive a crappy car because mine's wrecked. I was just a shit magnet. I'm not going to lie. And I don't know why. I did like to what we called hunt. I didn't like to be reactive, waiting on a call to drop. And then we had plenty of deputies that were happy running calls, but I like to be more proactive, what we called hunting,
And I think that's why, is it fair to say, do you get recruited into the weed and seed unit?
Yeah, the weed and seed unit. Yeah, that was a place for people that like to do proactive work.
And so what was that?
Weed and seed was a federal program that funded patrol slots. So what it did, let's say we had 30 patrol slots in the district that I worked in. Well, the feds would pay for 10 and put you in a zip code. So they identified this zip code. I think it was 77339 or 77 something. It was the Aldine area, Northeast Harris County, that's just overrun with narcotics and gangs. So they want 10 uniformed people. We're going to pay for their cars, their salary, some overtime, equipment, even if you need an office. We're going to pay for that. And that allows the sheriff's office to hire 10 more patrolmen to backfill your spots. So now you've got 10 extra patrolmen on the streets. And it was called Weed and Seed because there were community programs as well. So the weed part was getting rid of the crooks and cut down crime. And the seed part was coming in with resources, with school programs and, I don't know, just after school stuff, So it wasn't just arrest everybody. It was arrest everybody that you can, but we're also going to give some opportunities, And so, yeah, that's actually the first time I worked with my wife, Mary. We were on patrol, and we both got picked for the weed and seed. She was a heck of a cop. So yeah, we moved offices down into the Aldine area. I actually I went and got a recording, answering machine, old school answering machine, and made a tip line. And we put the tip line into the high schools and the junior high schools. And students who were afraid to be seen talking to police could call this number and say, hey, such and such, is selling dope out of his locker, or such and such has a gun in his car in the parking lot. And we actually made some good cases off of that. And we developed a gang identification system that fed into the statewide, where we'd have them hold the little board and take pictures of them that had their name, their street name, their gang, the date, height, weight, take pictures of their tattoos, and we were at that time in 97, 90, I can't remember, 97, 98, we were that was cutting edge back then, you know. It wasn't all digital stuff. But, you know, we would submit these gang cards into the databases, and we did a lot of good work, arrested a lot of people. We had an undercover car for surveillance. I got into trouble a few times getting hiding in the back of the truck while the guy comes up to sell dope and then jumping over the bed and tackling him. It was crazy. But anyway.
So, Bobby, it was interesting looking at your resume, your career. It's almost like you have two parts of your career. You have this patrol thing that's going on, but then, I mean, I think it's fair to say things go, I don't want to say sideways, but you have a little bit of interaction with some supervisors and stuff. And as punishment, they send you back to the jail. But you and I talked about that, and you were like, I think that was one of the best things that ever happened to me. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. I had gotten some 3 letters of reprimand for various minor offenses, you know, vehicle-related stuff or policy violations, nothing major. Everybody agreed if you were a good police officer, you were going to get write-ups. If you spent your career and never got a write-up, you were probably a lazy, fornicator. And so I got these letters of reprimand, you know, and I didn't think that much about it. And then I got a 3-day suspension for a minor accident. And it really ticked me off because I was working hard. And the first week of every month, I would open up my little mailbox at the patrol station, and I would have a handwritten letter from the captain congratulating me on having the highest number of felony arrests in the district. You know, 20, 25, 30. I mean, I was arresting a lot of people, and I busted my butt. And anyway, so I got really angry at this suspension because I had already received letters of reprimand for vehicle-related stuff, but I was driving 200-300 miles a shift across county, running hot chases, you know. And if you drive that much, as opposed to driving to the office and driving home, you're going to have a lot more accidents. And I was very vocal about, and I shouldn't have been because I was young and dumb and immature, but you know, you don't tell your boss's boss's boss, who's right under the sheriff, that, well, if I only had to sit in the office all day and not drive 300 miles, I probably wouldn't wreck my car either. And that went over like a lead balloon. And anyway, and then to top it off, I wrote my own appeal. I didn't use the union. Our union was weak and ineffective. I wrote my own appeal and went to a hearing with the chief deputy, this guy that wrote me up's boss. And I explained to him how this was not a motor vehicle accident per the state regulations because there was no injury to any person and no damage to any vehicle. I said, and here's the accident report that obviously no one read because all I did was hit the little car, knocked the dust off the bumper, and got out and self-reported it just in case so this girl wouldn't say that her neck was broke the next day. I did everything right. And I said, so if you can show me that this was a motor vehicle accident, I'll take my licks and take my 3 days off without pay. And he sent me out of the room and called that major in, the one that didn't like me. And he walked out and gave me the death look, like, you son of a... And they called me back in and said they were reinstating my 3 days off, giving me my money back, and taking it out of my record. So I heard through the grapevine that guy said he better not see my name come across his desk again. And it did. I got assaulted on a traffic stop. I took an elbow to the forehead when I was putting a parole violator into the back of a car. Let's just say where I worked and during my training and my second man time, there were a lot of guys that when they realized they were going to lose a foot chase, they may fire a warning shot. I'm not saying I did that, but the theory behind this alleged activity was they're either going to speed up and you're going to lose them anyway, but the other half will be like, oh crap, and get on the ground. And it actually worked about 50% of the time, played out from what I hear. And, but you're not supposed to do it at 12 noon near Old Town Spring, an antique shopping center in the heart of North Harris County. Nobody told me that allegedly. Anyway, that resulted in me, if I would have just admitted to it, and I should have, I probably would have just got a big suspension. But I wrote it out like a dummy, and I got 15 days off without pay, which was at the time I think a record in our department, and I got sent back to the jail in 1999.
But also during this time, Bobby, talk a little bit about you're working so much, and I'm assuming this contributed to a little bit of the stuff, but there were a couple things also that were happening. You end up getting divorced, and you were losing a lot of friends, essentially to, people were getting killed.
Yeah. There was no lack of funerals in the Harris County Sheriff's Office. It was around the time I was coming to the realization, after being hurt, being injured, getting into fights, getting into wrecks at 100 miles an hour with no seatbelt on, getting taken to the hospital. A friend of mine named Doug Knoll, he was my age. He went to patrol the same day I did. He was killed during a pursuit, and I was right down the road. And, looking at his broken body in this patrol car, was head facing the wrong way, and his center console in his big Caprice patrol car was actually right here where he's supposed to be sitting, where he got T-boned. Deputies I knew that worked in other patrol districts that were just murdered, flat out executed. There was a constable deputy that worked in our area on the Hardy Toll Road up and down our district. One night, we used to talk to him. I used to see him at the Stop and Go. Stop and Go had these police cups, law enforcement and firefighters only, and you get coffee, 2 or 3 in the morning, and you're sitting there talking to this guy, and he wanted to come to the sheriff's office, and he had been in the Army, and we just hit it off. And he got murdered by a 17-year-old kid one night, and I had the unlucky privilege of being one of his escorts back to the scene with the homicide detectives a few days later, so he could reenact how he pulled this gun out of his waist and shot the deputy in the throat, and then took the deputy's gun. And anyway, so all these things are piling up. I had a traffic stop with a partner. So I was training people. I had trained, one of the guys I trained was murdered later on, after my incidents and going back to the jail. But just all these things are piling up. I had a guy, I was trying to keep his hands on the truck while my partner searched the truck. I had pulled him over because he kept checking his mirror every 10 seconds. And that was something I taught my trainees, was if you get behind a vehicle, you run the plate, nothing's really up, but they just keep staring at you, and nervous, or they're reaching, or they take weird routes. Like they get off the main road to see if you're following them. And I said, just like this guy. And he's like, what are you talking about? I said, watch. He's checking the rearview mirror and the side mirror every 10 seconds. I said, watch this. And I could move my car over the line, and he's watching me and doing the same thing to keep me in his mirror. I said, that guy's probably got warrants. Well, he didn't have warrants. He was an illegal alien, and he was packing a big pistol in his waistband. And that was probably one of my closest calls, was pulling him out of the truck, putting his hands up. I spoke a little bit of Spanish, just survival Spanish, sus manos en la troca, or sus manos on the camioneta, or whatever. Put your hands on the truck, And my buddy, Tony, was searching the car, and he's not finding anything. I was like, well, fold the seat up, keep looking, something's going on. And we're waiting on dispatch to try to find an ID on this guy, because he had no ID. And I noticed that every 10 seconds or so, this guy would take his hands off the side of the truck and just kind of stand up. And I put them back on. So the third time, I put my hand and grabbed his shirt and forcefully put him on the truck. And both of his hands went down instantly. And he grabbed a Browning high power 9mm, fully loaded, one in the chamber. And luckily he had trouble. The shirt was kind of long, like an untucked Western shirt, pearl snap. I'll never forget it. Skinny Mexican dude. and he's trying to pull the shirt with this hand and get the gun out with the right hand. And Tony said he thinks I yelled gun, which was part of our training, you know, to let everybody know, but he wasn't sure. He thought he heard something. And I don't know, instincts took over. I don't know if I can say training took over, because you don't really... I mean, we had some weapon retention training where somebody's trying to get your gun, but I don't remember looking back. You know, what do you do when you're up against somebody and they're pulling their gun? Do you create space, draw and shoot? But my instincts were to not let him get that gun. And what I was told and when I arrested so many people that when the record drivers heard me on a traffic stop, they knew somebody was probably going to jail, because I didn't pull over people I didn't pull over working people. I didn't pull over speeders, really. I probably wrote less tickets in my time on patrol than any other person, but they let me slide on that because I made so many arrests. And if I pulled somebody over, it was probably for reasonable suspicion that they were up to no good, you know. And just like this guy, I thought he had traffic warrants or something worse, you know. And luckily I was tuned in because he had already come off the truck twice, you know, and stood up. And very nervous. He was nervous, and he kept trying to speak with a smile on his face, but that smile, you know, that smile that doesn't go to your eyes, you know, it's no problem, it's okay. I got 2 jobs, that kind of, it's okay, no problem. But he kept standing up, and you know, and that red flag. Well, anyway, the record driver who heard me go out on traffic and pulled up said that my arms went around him and pinned the gun like that. And then I picked him up over my head and body slammed him in the middle of the street. And when I did, he already had the gun. The magazine, the cap on the end of the magazine hit the concrete and popped off, and 15 rounds or whatever went rolling, but there's still one in the chamber. So I held on to the gun, and then I got my knee on his neck, and then the next thing I know, this 300-pound record driver helped me. I don't remember your name, sir, but thank you. Meanwhile, my buddy Tony's got his head under the back seat. Nope, nothing here. He said he stood up, and there's nobody around. Well, that's because we're all on the ground on the other side of the truck, you know, and I'm in the middle of this major intersection, Aldine Mail Route and Airline Road, you know, just tap dancing on this guy until I can get the gun away and get him handcuffed. And, you know, what's scary about the whole thing, that's not satisfying to me, is I never found out why. You know, he was an illegal alien, but he had no criminal history based on prints. Never been to jail. All I can think of is he just didn't want to go back to Mexico or get caught with a gun. So instead of saying, I got a gun, you know, right here, it's no problem, it's okay, I got 2 jobs, he tried to pull it, you know. And I can say that, you know, my instincts or something in training or something, you know, probably saved my life that day. But add that to all the deaths and the injuries and the stress and the working extra jobs when you've had no sleep and working overtime. And I worked federal overtime grants for DWI and seatbelt STEP. It's called STEP, Selective Traffic Enforcement Program. So you could work your shift and then stay on for 8 hours and work. So I worked all that I could because I had kids and, you know, buying a house and all this. So it was just a big mess, big perfect combination to end my marriage, end my patrol career, and get me, later on, get me sent back to the jail for policing the way I was policing. But I really believe God had a plan. And if I had not been sent back to the jail, I'm not sure what would have happened. I had no ambition to really do anything except go to that next 911 call, you know, kick in that next door or chase that next car. You know, that was life to me. And I didn't want to miss 8-hour shift of it. But getting sent back to the jail just changed everything.
Yeah, so it's interesting, Bobby. It's almost like a reset. So you go back to the jail, you go back to college. Then you start studying for the detective exam. So you earned your BC in professional writing and technical communication. Why'd you go back to college and focus on that degree?
The simple answer is I really thought I needed a criminal justice degree, and somebody, more than one person, told me, you don't need a criminal justice degree. You're in criminal justice. You need something you can use. You need to find something that you can use outside of law enforcement or within law enforcement that has nothing to do with criminal justice. And I had already taken 2 or 3 criminal justice classes, and I had all my basics, most of my basics out of the way from when I was in the Marines. And I don't know if you're familiar with the CLEP exam, but that's a college level equivalency. You can go take the final exam, and I took the final exam for English 1, 2, government 1, 2, and some other class, economics or something. And I passed the final exam. So I got 18 hours of college without even having to take a class. So I'm like, man, this college thing's cool. And I enjoyed it. I enjoyed and I had the work ethic and the discipline now. Before, if I would have went to college like a normal all-American kid, right out of high school, that would have been a disaster.
But why did you decide to go back to college and get your degree? Was it something that you needed in order to become a detective?
No. It's just something I wanted to do.
Okay.
I enjoyed going to school. And it had been a while since I'd taken any classes. And I don't know. I felt like it was something I needed to do. And this was the perfect opportunity, was getting sent back to the jail and looking out the window of the jail. There's University of Houston right there across the bridge, And so I went over there, and these people had told me about this criminal justice not really being a good idea. I mean, yeah, you'll have a degree, but you may not be in law enforcement forever. And I was already having doubts about whether I wanted to stay in law enforcement. So there's this carousel inside the lobby of University of Houston downtown that has a spinning carousel with degree plans on pieces of paper. And I had always liked writing. I did great in English in school, writing. I was in creative writing class 2 years in high school. I wrote poetry. I wrote short stories. And then I kind of, was in a position where I couldn't do that anymore. And I saw this professional writing. I didn't know what the technical communication was. That was the boring part. But, professional writing, And I picked it up. I looked at it. Nope. I hated math. Didn't need calculus. Didn't need... I already had college algebra from when I was in the Marines, thank God, because I sucked at math. And this had no other math requirements other than college algebra, which I already had. Now, criminal justice, you had to take statistics or calculus. No. So anyway, I got into it. I signed up for some classes. I could only take 1 or 2 at a time at first, and man, I loved it. Straight A's. Not to dislocate my shoulder again, but, I graduated summa cum laude with a 3.98. I made 1B, which lowered and it was on a class that didn't really count. But anyway, I just loved it. And
so in 2003, you end up becoming a detective. When you become a detective, is there a goal? Do you want to become a homicide detective? Is there anything specifically that you were trying to get to once you became a detective?
No. There was probably no one else on that detective exam list that knew less about detective work than I did. My only interaction with detectives were going to shooting scenes, and I was handling things, and I was separating witnesses, and I was getting information, and then they would take over and kick me, you need to go.
So if you didn't know much about being a detective, why take the exam?
Well, that was a route out of the jail.
Okay.
There are no detectives serving in the jail.
Okay.
Now, I could have taken the sergeant's test or the detective test at the same, I could have taken both of those, but I knew the sheriff's office sends you to the jail every time you get promoted. Why would I want to take the sergeant's test even if I'm number 1 on the list, And now I've got this disciplinary record hanging over my head. I'm tainted goods, I'm never going anywhere but the jail. But if I make detective, they have to put me in the detective bureau. There's no detectives in the jail. So that was part of the reasoning. The other one was weekends, day shift off for the most part. Not all of it. A take-home car, a pay raise, and a shiny gold badge that says detective. And I really thought and I had been told that my patrol reports were good and that I did good follow-up, and I like to file charges myself. Like even on a domestic violence, we were supposed to write a report. Unless the guy's on scene, we're supposed to hand it over, pass it on to the family violence unit or domestic violence unit. I didn't like that. I like filing my own charges. And that's the main part of being an investigator, is following up, getting statements and finding crooks and putting them in jail. And I liked that. So I studied real hard for the detective test. Like I said, I was going to college full time and got my degree while I was still in the jail. And I may have gotten some points on the detective test. I think I got my bachelor's degree just in time to get, you got extra points for having an advanced peace officer or master peace officer license. You got extra points for having a degree and extra points for having investigative experience at another agency or whatever. But anyway, so yeah, I came out real high on the detective list and got promoted in May of 2003.
So you're immediately sent to the warrants unit, and while you're at the warrants unit, you start working at the U.S. Marshal Task Force, and they eventually ask you back, and you serve 2 years there. But I thought what was interesting is you said, hey, look, that was fun. I enjoyed that, but you wanted more. What was more for you?
Well, it just wasn't, it only took a few months of running felony warrants, and this was the Violent Offender Task Force, so we're running warrants on murder suspects, sexual assault suspects, kidnappers, just any violent felony got moved out of the regular warrant unit where I had been working and moved to the Gulf Coast Violent Offender Task Force, which was U.S. Marshals, Houston Police Department, Harris County, all these agencies in the area. But after tracking down fugitives, and I learned a lot tracking fugitives that really helped me later on in my career for tracking down suspects, witnesses, whatever. It just wasn't as satisfying, I would read the probable cause statements on some of these warrants and see the investigations, and cell phone records and, vehicle trackers and all this stuff and confessions and interviews. And I was like, man, that's real police work, Yeah, running warrants is dangerous. I had some close calls up there climbing into attics and things like that. It was a great job, but I saw people that were stuck there. They had been detectives for 10, 15 years, and they had been running warrants that entire time. Eventually, the odds are going to catch up to you when you're chasing guys that don't want to go to prison. Not that I was scared. I was just, it was, I was looking at the bigger picture finally. I never looked at the big picture the first half of my career. It was always the next shift, the next call, the next arrest. But now I'm thinking, okay, I've got 4 boys now. I'm remarried. You see, when was my daughter born? Yeah, I have 5 kids now. My daughter was born in 2001, and I was promoted in 2003. So I had a daughter and 4 sons, wife, everything's going pretty good. And I start looking at the big picture. I could actually make a career, because at this point, I really it didn't click that I was going to do a whole career, that I was going to get a pension, that I was going to do 30, 25, whatever. I'm still in the back of my mind, I got this degree, and I got friends that are in the civilian world that are saying, man, with your degree and, your whatever, people skills, we could get you a job, blah, 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 paying more than you make. So it's always in the back of my mind. But long story short, where was I going? I didn't want to run warrants anymore. For the 2 reasons. It wasn't satisfying because I actually saw what went into producing that warrant, and that's what I wanted to do. And just the grind, getting up at 5 a.m. or being on scene at 5 a.m, talking to some guys, and then hitting a house, kicking in a door. Yeah, it's a dream job, but after a couple years of that, not even a full 2 years, I was looking for an out.
And so you end up going to the robbery unit. You love it. Why? What kind of cases are you working there?
Man, the robbery unit in Harris County the cases were amazing. Homicide gets all the glory and the news, but the majority of homicides are not, how to put this, they're not like TV homicides. I mean, it's horrible that there's a loss of life, but the majority, 90 something percent of victims of homicide are people that were living a high risk lifestyle. I'll just put it that way to be nice, that any reasonable person should know if you engage in this lifestyle over and over, the chances of you getting killed because of that lifestyle are a lot higher than Grandma Groceries getting killed in the parking lot during, whatever, carjacking. That's just the way it was. But no, most people don't know that watch TV. Every murder is just this, this big conspiracy, whatever. But the majority of murders are just sad and depressing for the loss of life, but also because that person's childhood or their poor decision making or their addiction. We'll just say it. I would say when I was a homicide lieutenant at the end of my career, I could damn near tie drugs into every case. At least 90% of our, 120 to 180 murder, whatever, I can't remember offhand, but you could somehow tie in drugs to those murders. And it was just depressing, But robbery, the crews you got hijackers, you got home invaders, you got business robberies, you got, we didn't really work bank robberies. We would do the initial investigation and the FBI would take over, but I worked with them on multiple cases. The armored car robberies, I would say the crooks put in a lot more work. A homicide usually an act of passion or an act of, oh shit, I just killed somebody and I didn't even plan on killing nobody today. But robbery, you had your simple robberies where shoplifting gone bad and they punched the loss prevention clerk at the Target store. That's a robbery. But you also had a crew of 5 following business owners to the bank and watching them every Friday because they own a check cashing business and they need $40,000 cash just to make it through Friday to cash the payroll checks of people that come in that don't use the banks. And they follow them to the bank. It's called jugging. And they watch them walk in and then they walk out with a big yellow envelope and they get in their car and they follow them out of the bank and then they bump into them on a traffic, on a road somewhere out of sight, or they catch them in the parking lot back at their store and they pistol whip them or kill them eventually. But I was working these jugging crews. I was working home invasion crews that were robbing. And once again, home invasion is a term that the public is, if you get home invaded, the chances are you probably had drugs. You probably had a lot of cash from illicit means. When I worked home invasions, very rarely was it just, never was it. I think there were like 2, and it was because one of the kids in the house was a turd and he was on drugs or in a gang, and he tells all of his buddies that, dad and mom, in this case that I'm thinking of, they were Indian and they had heirloom jewelry from India, just a lot of heirloom jewelry in a safe. And the boy turned on his own parents, and brought in his crew and pistol whipped the mom and the dad and the grandma and got into the safe at gunpoint, give me the that was rare. Most home invasions were drug dealers or drug related, or, they had $100,000 in the attic because they had sold a couple kilos and they were about to move it to Mexico, whatever. So anyway, these crews were fun to work for me. They were challenging. They were complicated. They were hard crooks to interview. They weren't your normal, 18-year-old kid. Hey, it'd go easier on you if you tell me, that you robbed that store, it always goes easier on people that, whatever. It wasn't that kind of crooks. You had to get evidence and you had to trick them and trap them and outsmart them. And it was challenging. I would say working robberies to me was, other than the paperwork and the law challenges, the legal hurdles, working robbery suspects is harder than working homicide suspects. Mm-hmm. You mentioned a 90% clearance rate in the homicide unit. Yeah, if you get 50, 60 in a robbery unit, you're kicking ass because robberies are hard to work and there's a lot of them. And so we didn't have the staffing. So.
And it's interesting because you said during that time that you're working in robbery, you were actually asked to go to homicide twice. Why didn't you go?
Just from talking to people that were over there, the call out schedule was just not going to work for my life. I had plans to get my master's degree. I wanted to teach criminal justice at the local community college. I was tired of working law enforcement related extra jobs. I was tired of being plainclothes detective and then having to put on a uniform and go work security at a store. But, with all these kids and a mortgage, and I had expensive hobbies like archery and bow hunting and deer hunting and deer leases and fishing, and my kids were into archery, bow hunting, fishing, sports. There was never enough money, and homicide would pretty much guarantee that every 3 weeks I'm going to be working a week straight because you're going to get called out. Robbery had a call out, don't get me wrong, but only certain robberies required you to go make a scene, and it was usually patrol catching a robbery suspect in the act or right after the act, and you had to go take custody of that person and interview them and file charges. That didn't happen all the time. Most robbers get away with it initially, but I would say it was the call-out schedule, hectic. I was starting to enjoy family life, as before I couldn't or didn't or wasn't mature enough to take a breath because I was eat up with work and things. And I don't know. The guys over there just didn't look. They would love to be a homicide detective and let you know they were in homicide and flash their badge. But when you walk through the office, which was from here to there, from the robbery office, they looked like shit. They were tired. They were dirty. They hadn't shaved. They lived off of coffee and drive-thrus. And my buddy Eric, who ended up being my partner and supervisor for a while in cold case, he just always, hey, been out for 42 hours, man, on a guy that shot a drug dealer. And the only difference between my case and his case was my guy still had a pulse, and he got robbed and he got shot and he's in the hospital. But I can talk to my guy and I can show my guy a lineup, and I can get a confession from my victim about what really happened. Do you want me to catch this guy? If you do, sign this consent for your phone, because I know y'all were texting. You're on film doing a dope deal. Y'all didn't just magically run into each other like little ants in a trail, and then they either see the light or they want to be a badass and say, no, I'll take care of it myself, and I write up my report, and victim refused to cooperate, victim refused to name a suspect, victim refused to let me look at his phone, and the DA's office is not interested in obtaining a warrant on a victim's phone, maybe a suspect.
Yeah.
Case closed or case suspended, But these homicide guys, they can't do that, So they're just pounding trying to get a lead on a guy that was killed doing that same thing that my guy was doing, and the other guy happened to be a better shot. I don't mean to sound callous, about it, but when you work violent crimes for 20 years straight, from running the warrants to filing the robbery charges to doing cold case homicide, child abuse, and all the stuff I did at the crime scene unit and homicide unit, the shock factor wears off. It doesn't mean you're less human or less, that you don't care and you don't see the tragedy, but it just becomes just a drag. And the way you protect your mind and your sanity is, it's work. Of course, all that goes out the window when you have a child or a true victim that was actually just minding their own business as opposed to a drug dealer. But
So, Bobby, before we get to the job that I think you would consider the best job you ever had, before that happens, you get cancer. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that was a pivotal. I've had a lot of resets in my life.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like the getting sent back to the jail was a reset, and everything's going well, and all of a sudden this happens, and that's a reset.
Yeah, I was blessed with bad genetics, and well, at least we think it's possibly familial. The VA seems to think that I probably got colon cancer in the Gulf War from breathing in all the oil fumes we were operating underneath the burning oil fields in Kuwait. Saddam Hussein and his troops lit all the oil fields on fire as they were fleeing Kuwait to make a natural disaster and to slow down the American troops. So when we were over in Kuwait, just imagine how it looks outside at a horrible thunderstorm or right before dark. That's how it was all day long. And everybody knows how hot the sun is and how bright the sun is in Kuwait, in the Middle East, 120, 130 degrees. There was hardly any sun. I mean, I have pictures from over there where it just looks like, it's 8 o'clock at night. But all of our uniforms were coated in oil. Well, not to get into a tangent. But on top of that, so I had that going for me, breathing in this oil for several weeks. And my dad had early onset colon cancer and died in 2007. So he would have been about 50 years old when he got it. And I think he survived for 4 years after surgery and losing most of his colon and a chunk of his liver. But it had already spread. All that to say, they suspected that due to my dad getting it earlier than normal, 70, 80 years old, like a lot of men, that me and my 4 brothers, even my sister, would probably need to get tested early. And they said, if your insurance gives you any hassle, let them know your father died of early onset colon cancer. So I went and got checked after my dad died. So probably 2007-ish, I went and got a colonoscopy and everything. And they're like, you're good. You don't even have a polyp. Some of my brothers had polyps and they weren't cancerous. They burned them or cleared them. So we're all good. And 3 years later, I had full-blown colon cancer that had already grown out of the colon into my lymph nodes at the age of 39, 2009. I was born in 70, 39. Long story short, I had been feeling bad. I was pale, getting out of breath very easy. I loved hunting and all things related to hunting, and I would go out to the properties where I hunted and I couldn't work. I'd get out of breath. I was like, God, I got to lose weight. I got to get in shape. I got to start running, but that wasn't it. I had no blood. All of my blood was feeding into these tumors, and I didn't know it. And a buddy of mine begged me to go fishing with him one night. It was actually called bow fishing. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but you get on a lake, and we went to Lake Conroe, which is, you passed it on the way up here. And we're shooting these gar and carp with a bow and arrow. Just a really good time, but I just didn't feel good. And normally I could stay out till daylight. When the sun comes up, we would go home, get a few hours sleep. But we hit a stump, and we got high centered on the stump. So imagine the boat's going forward and goes up on a stump, and we're stuck. So he tells me to hang on. There's a guardrail around the boat where you lean over and shoot your bow. And he tells me to hang on to the guardrail because he's going to back off the stump. So he did, and it worked. And I relaxed. And when I relaxed, he hit another stump in reverse, and it threw me off an elevated platform. I fell into the bottom of the boat and landed on a metal barrel, like a half 55-gallon barrel that we had been throwing these fish in. And it broke 4 ribs. And I guess when it sent all, when you get injured, your body sends blood to an injury. And I said, man, I'm hurt. I can't breathe. I said, we got to go. So I sit down on a little seat bench in this aluminum boat, and I pass out 2 or 3 times on the way to the boat ramp. Fall over, hit my head. He's trying to hold me up. Thanks, Charlie. I appreciate it. He's trying to hold me up and drive the boat, and I'm passing out, hit my head pretty good. Long story short, I got 4 broken ribs that they find later. Everything's okay. You might have a mild concussion. Everything's good. Well, here's where God stepped in. God decided that, if that didn't wake you up with this boating accident and the way you've been feeling, I'm going to give you a horrible pain in your back. And I got a horrible pain in my back. I was laying over the bed, moaning and crying, and I consider myself a tough guy. And I've had broken bones, broken legs with bones sticking out, broken fingers, all over, all kinds of injuries, broken feet, toes. Never went to the doctor unless I absolutely had to. And I'm telling my wife to call 911. And in my mind, I've got internal injuries from those broken ribs or something. I'm bleeding out. I'm thinking the worst, And I'm saying, God, I don't know what this is, but I'm listening. Oh, it's a kidney stone. Never had a kidney stone. And so this 4 broken ribs and the concussion, mild concussion, and all the bruising from falling in the boat and passing out. And then I get home, start feeling a little bit better, and I get a kidney stone. So the kidney stone doctor's like, that is a huge kidney stone, and it looks like I don't know if you're familiar with grass burrs, but he said it's got like spikes. It looks like Satan in there. He said, you can't pass it. He said, we're going to put you in the hospital. I'm just making this up, Tuesday, and we're going to zap it, with ultrasound, microscope, whatever they call it, and break it up so you can pass it. And they're giving me pain medicine. I mean, this is the worst pain. I'd rather be shot, stabbed, monkey stomped by a rodeo bull than have a kidney stone. And I felt like a little wimp. And they did some minor blood work prior to my procedure. And I show up at the doctor that morning to get my kidney stones zapped. He's like, we need to talk. And the wife's like, okay. And all I'm thinking is, y'all are zapping this stone. I don't care if I have to hijack this place and grab your ultrasound thing. I'm zapping it. He's like, there's something wrong with your blood. He said, you're severely anemic, and men usually aren't anemic. And he said, so there's either 2 things. You're a rare male that's got anemia, or maybe something more serious. But all that to say, your hemoglobin count's supposed to be 12 to 14. Mine was 6. He said, you're a walking stroke. They put me in the hospital immediately, gave me 4 units of blood, transfer blood, whatever it's called, transfusion. And they referred me to an oncologist. And the oncologist looked at everything and he said, I hate to say it, but we're going to do an endoscopy and a colonoscopy tomorrow. And, based on my 30-year career, you probably got a tumor somewhere that's taking your blood because you're not anemic. So that really resets you there. It just kind of takes your breath away. And my dad, I just got over my dad dying of colon cancer a few years before. So that's what's on my mind. Trying to keep it from the kids. Wife's keeping her stuff straight for me and the kids. Anyway, yeah, sure enough, the next day, very blunt doctor. I'll never forget. Dr. Ranganathan, Indian guy. But I like blunt. I didn't want beating around the bush. He's like, you got stage 3A colon cancer, which means it's only in one organ, but it's outside your colon. Stage 3 is in your colon. Stage 3A, I believe, was the colon and the lymph nodes. Stage 4 would have been multiple organs. And he says, we got to do surgery, right now. So I never left the hospital after my kidney stone treatment, basically. I went in to get my kidney stone zapped in an outpatient clinic. Next thing I know, I'm getting a blood transfusion. The next day, they took out a foot of colon. And he cleared out as many lymph nodes as he could find that were hard. And it was in what he called the mesentery, the little film around your organs. And I went on chemo. After a round of chemo, I don't remember how many weeks or months, they did another scan and it was already back. Already growing back in the colon where they had joined the 2 pieces. So this doctor's like, well, all right, let's cut another foot of colon out. So now these surgeries are hard on you. I mean, you're laid up and you can't leave for a long time and you're sore. And I mean, I got this huge scar, 13, 14-inch scar that they ended up going through 3 times. That time they cut another foot of colon. They put me on chemo, a different chemo. And my wife insisted that we not wait the 3 months or 6 months to get another scan. Thank God. I think I was not even halfway through my chemo regimen when they did another scan and it was already growing back faster and bigger on chemo. I mean, this thing was like drinking chemo for an energy drink. And finally, the doctor was smart enough to realize you don't need to be here at this hospital. You need to go to MD Anderson, the world-renowned cancer center in downtown Houston, where all the rich people from all over the world go when they get cancer. And that doctor, he went to work and he came up with a plan. He said, all right. He said, we're doing surgery, but you're going to lose your entire colon. Now, this whole time, I'm an active robbery investigator and got a caseload, and I'm running out of sick time. Luckily, I had some really good, going back to the esprit de corps, brotherhood, that, luckily I had a sergeant and a lieutenant that were that tight. One of them was a military veteran, and the other one was just a good cop. And he recognized that I was in a bind with kids and family and bills, no more extra jobs, going to chemo. I would come to work during those first 2 surgeries with a chemo bag and a fanny pack. Not real trendy, not real sexy, but I had a pump. And I have a scar right here where I had a pump and a battery operated bag of chemo for 3 days a week. And then I would throw up for 2 days a week. And then I would take a break and then I'd go right back in. It was horrible, but just a blur. All that to say, they took out my entire colon, connected my small intestine. When they knocked me out, the doctor said, "I'm not sure you have enough viable tissue after these surgeries and this chemo to attach your colon anymore, or attach your small intestine to your rectum. If you wake up and you got a colostomy bag, you know that I'm sorry, but there was no viable tissue." So first thing I did when I woke up out of surgery, thank God, surgery went well. Anyway, that did it. I mean, total lifestyle change. I have to take 4 pills a day to slow down my digestive system, and it affected my work. It affected my call out. It affected everything, but I refused to let it keep me down. I went deer hunting in Canada. I don't know. Can't really show that, but I shot a monster buck in Manitoba, Canada, in between my chemo sessions. Doctor told me not to go. My wife told me not to go. I was like, hey, I ain't living like I'm dying. I'm going. I went elk hunting with broken back, so I'm going to do what I want to do. Anyway, long story short, the cancer has been gone since 2000. I can't say long story short. I'm way past that. The cancer's been gone since 2011. I get scanned quite a bit. And it's been a lifestyle change with not having a colon. You can look it up. It's not fun. But I'm perpetually dehydrated. I get dehydrated very easy. And I have to take medicine so I don't live in the bathroom. And I'll just leave it at that.
So, Bobby, what's really interesting is I got hooked up with you through a Texas Ranger that I interviewed on the channel, and he said, "Hey, look, you got to call this guy. You got to interview him because he is a phenomenal cold case detective," which I think says a lot, especially coming from a Texas Ranger. I was very impressed with those guys. So you get cancer. And in 2011, you go back to work, and essentially an old partner of yours says, "Come to work with me," right? You start working the cold case homicide unit. You call it the best job you ever had. Why?
The way my mind was geared investigatively, and I don't know. He said he wanted me. This actually kind of caused some waves because there were a lot of homicide unit guys that probably felt that was their gig. They had been working active homicide. I'd never worked active homicide. If you remember, I turned it down.
Yeah.
So in a lot of people's minds, I didn't deserve that job. And in my mind too, I'm like, why are you calling me, man? I'm in robbery. I turned down homicide. And he goes, because I know how you are. I know how your mind works. I know you're like a dog with a bone. I know you're smart. I know you know how to find things. You know how to find people. You've had the perfect resume for what we do, which is a lot different than working active homicides. He said people that work active homicides are not necessarily any good at cold, and that just blew my mind. He said it's a total different game. You're dealing with 20, 30, 40-year-old cases sometimes. And he said, I just know how you are. And he said, you're the first name that popped into my mind. And I still felt like I didn't deserve it, I didn't want to cause any waves with guys that were kind of friends or coworkers of mine, right down the hall. But, hey, I'm not going to pass it up if you're really offering it, And I went and interviewed with the lieutenant that was over the regular homicide, and he was over robbery, and he was over cold case. And I said, I don't want this job because I'm friends with Eric and me and him, arrested people on patrol together. I said, I want this job because you think, he goes, no. He said, it's nothing like that. And he said, if you want it, it's yours, and I have no reservations about you having never worked homicide. And I said, okay, then let's do it. And that was the start of, from 2011 to around mid 2017, I believe. Yeah, like you said, best job in the world. Harris County, we had a vault in our building, and our building was built in the 30s or 40s. We had a vault, a fireproof vault with old sprinklers and a big jail cell that used to be a holding cell back in the 60s. And it had 900, I can't remember the number, just hundreds of unsolved cases going back to the early 70s, and a few from the 60s. But a lot of the stuff had been lost in a fire or a flood. And so I had to figure out, how do we choose a case, and then once I learned how we choose a case, it's not just random, you get phone calls from family, you get tips through Crime Stopper. I mean, there's a lot of different ways you get a case, but we would have to do a case assessment and read the case, look for the evidence, do an evidence review, do a case review, see if anybody's still alive to talk to. We had to grade these cases kind of on a scale, and we called it solvability. And if a case had 0 or low solvability, we didn't close it or throw it away. It stayed in the vault. But we had cases with more solvability. And then I helped the unit. We had 2 investigators and a clerk. Rebecca. Hi, Rebecca. I know you're going to watch this. Still friends. She was good. Even though she was a clerk, she knew cold cases, and she helped us manage grants. We got 2 grants for solving cold cases with DNA, which was a big deal. And, based on the numbers we could find, our unit outperformed, bigger agency cold case. They're like LAPD and Houston Police Department. They had 9 or 10 people in cold case, and we had 2. 2 investigators and one.
Why do you think you guys were so successful?
Combination of keeping an open mind and not being stuck in, this one's looks hard, this one looks easy. Everybody says DNA cases are easy. Those were some of the hardest cases. We solved the majority of our cases with talking to people. You got to think, when somebody's murdered in 1989, everybody around that victim and those suspects are in a different stage of life, a different state of mind. They may be afraid. They may have been an addict. They may have been in love with the suspect or hated the victim and didn't want to cooperate. There's so many factors. But when you fast forward 15, 20 years, people are in a different stage of life. I can't tell you how many times we knocked on a door and, hey, we'd like to talk to you about that murder that happened when you were 18 over on such and such street. And you just see the shoulders like, I was wondering if you were ever going to call me, and then, my buddy's like, oh yeah. And the oh shit look when you knock on a suspect's door, hey, we're with the Harris County Sheriff's Office cold case unit. I got to work. Can I call y'all back? It's just, it was just so satisfying. We had some really good cases. And
Yeah,
I think because we had so many to pick from, it's not like this Centerville up here that's had 2 murders in 30 years.
Yeah.
We're having, 2-3 murders a week.
Yeah, so tell me about, I think it's fair to say, the oldest Texas cold case murder ever filed after 41 years. Tell me about that.
Yeah. Now, I didn't keep up with it after that, so it could have been surpassed.
Sure.
Yeah, I had a 1976 case. And when I say I mean me and my partner. But we took turns being the lead, Mm-hmm. We ran the case. We came up with the investigative plan. Whoever was the lead, hey, we got to go to this prisoner. Sometimes it would take us to Michigan, Georgia, Missouri. We've been all over, Illinois, been in prisons. Probably every Texas prison there is, interviewing people, and prisons in just gobs of states. I can't even think of them all, but we took road trips. Some of them 5,000 mile round trip, hitting multiple cases around the country. Great job, like I said. But no, the 1976 case, it was a It was a man who killed, and he killed 2 people. I was only able to file 1, but he killed. Turns out this guy was homosexual, but he didn't want to be, and so, out of frustration for his own sexual proclivities, he would go pick up gay people at a bar and have sex with them or sexually assault them and then kill them. And we were able to find 1 or 2 HPD, Houston Police Department reports, where he had done the same thing, but they got away, or he threatened to kill them and he didn't. And then we had 2 murders where the bodies were found a mile apart out in the woods in a rural area where he had tortured and killed my main victim. He had stabbed him 50-something times, cut his ears off, just a bunch of stuff. But under that DNA grant, we went and did a physical search of the archives because it said that they had taken swabs from the victim, different swabs, almost like a sexual assault kit because of the evidence. And initially I was told that had been destroyed. And I had a good friend that we worked with a lot down at the DNA lab, and she was able to get us access to what they called histology, which is where they keep samples of blood and semen and rectal swabs and all these different kind of swabs they take at autopsy. And we found the kit, we found they were slides. They would take a swab and then put it on a glass slide and then sandwich another slide on top of it, stick them together. And we just got lucky finding that evidence. But finding that evidence and getting the DNA hit, like I mentioned when we were off camera, DNA cases are not easy because there's a lot of DNA. You know, if I got killed right now in this house, you know, and you had been here last week, I can't just find your DNA right there where you put your camera gear and go file charges because, well, you know, you got the wife's DNA, you got a couple kids' DNA, grandkids, and you got this weird guy from Idaho's DNA that, why was he there? I don't know, but let's file charges. It don't work that way. Yeah. Prosecutors aren't going to take that charge. So we have to find you, you know, and we have to eliminate you. And if the suspect doesn't cooperate, and I'm not going to go too much into techniques, tactics, and protocols, but a DNA case is not a slam dunk at all. Because all that suspect, I mean, let's say he was innocent, you know? Yeah, that was my girlfriend. I dated her. Shoot, I saw her about a month before she got killed. That was horrible. I tried to go to the funeral, but I was at work. But yeah, I was in her apartment. Well, he just gave himself an alibi, and you can't really disprove that without a confession. So DNA cases can be hard, and it takes a lot of experience and trial and error and going back to games inmates play. You have to make a read on this guy in the interview room. You have to make a quick snap read of this guy and see what's going to push his buttons. And in this case, on the 1976 case, I had a lot of evidence, circumstantial and out of his own mouth, that I could tell that he hated gay people. Whenever I showed him pictures of the victim, whenever I talked about the case, you know, I hadn't told him about the DNA, you know, but I just say, hey man, we got some information that you might have been at the clubs where these 2 guys were at. Nah, I ain't going to no homo bar. Yeah, you could just tell he was just angry about it. It just set him off, you know, it pushed his button. So which way am I going? I'm going right there, you know. Well, any reason why, you know, multiple people would say that you went to that bar a lot? And then he starts thinking, well, he's not real bright for one, but he's thinking, well, maybe they got one of my buddies to roll on me, you know. He goes, well, I'll be honest with you, man. We would go down there and pick up them homos and beat the crap out of them in the parking lot or whatever, you know. Just can't stand them. You know, this guy's looking at a murder charge. He's in the sheriff's office homicide unit interview room, and he can't control just the visible, visceral anger at these homosexuals. And it turns out it's because he was one. But in the 70s, you can't tell your big oil field redneck buddies, you know, that, you know, I play for both teams. You know, I'm a pitcher and a catcher because I'd get your ass beat. and lose your friends and your family disown you. And that's what happened to our victim. When it came out that he was gay in Jeanerette, Louisiana, his family kicked him out of the house. I talked to his sister who was in her 70s or 80s after I filed the charges and got the guy in custody. And she said, yeah, it was just a different time. It was horrible. But the only place he knew to go where there were gay people not getting ostracized or beat up was Houston, Texas, in the Montrose area, which was, it still is, a homosexual area where they live and work and everything's fine. But he would go there to target, And anyway, I got him so angry in the interview room, basically calling him some words. It seems to me like you're and he got mad, he wanted to come up out of the chair at me a couple times, and I got him to the point where he admitted that he would pay them for oral sex only and then beat them up, just to see what it was all about, But he had never even been to that area because that's where the homos live and I don't go there. Now he's paying for oral sex, And he gave up some other things in the interview. And he lived, at the time, half a mile from the dump site of both bodies. And he worked for his uncle who read the oil well gas meters. He would go drive through the fields. And this is like across the street from our sheriff academy in Atascocita, which is the north side of Harris County, right where I patrolled growing up in patrol. But this kid would ride with his uncle and get out and write down the numbers on the gas meters to report back to the gas company the volume of gas, natural gas. And that's where the bodies were, right here by his gas pump. So I had the DNA from the kit. I had his semi-confession. And I had all the circumstantial stuff, where he lived, and anyway. I ended up filing a murder charge on him. He fled after I had 2 interviews. The first time he wouldn't talk to me at his house or at a work site, I think. I tried to get him to come with me after I got the DNA back. And anyway, he fled to... After I interviewed him, I had to cut him loose. Long story, non-custodial interview. You know what I mean? I didn't read him his rights because he's not in custody. Mm-hmm. And I didn't quite have enough to file the charge based on a confession. It was right there, so I needed to talk to the DA. Well, the safest thing to do sometimes, since you got him there under non-custodial agreement, is to let him go and keep tabs on him. So we kept tabs on him, but we didn't keep tabs good enough because he fled to Mississippi and was eventually arrested by the U.S. Marshals Fugitive Task Force, not the one I worked for, but the one out of, I think, Gulfport, Mississippi, had an office. And they arrested him living in a tent behind his dad's house. But anyway, he was already 62 years old from this 1976 case. And I believe he got 25 years or something. Should have got more. But, whenever, that's what's interesting about a cold case is whatever legal restrictions or sentencing guidelines were in place at the time of the murder, that's what you have to go by. So if there was no capital murder, or if a murder sentence carried 10 to life, that's what the judge has to use, was 1976.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah, and I didn't know that when I first got into it. Oh, yeah, this is a death penalty case. They killed this guy during a robbery. And my buddy's like, no, not back then. No. So
how about this? You mentioned that you had interrogated some high-profile serial killers. Can you tell me of the one that had a peripheral, connection to your aunt?
Oh, yeah. Well, let me tell you the other one real quick.
Yeah.
There's an FBI... made-for-TV movie about the FBI's investigation into a serial killer named Robert Ben Rhodes. It's called Driven to Kill. He was a truck driver, unfortunately a Marine Corps veteran. He got kicked out of the Marine Corps after committing a robbery in the Marine Corps, I believe. I found out later. But he went around the country in his 18-wheeler and would pick up, back in the 70s and early 80s, there was a lot of hitchhiking, and he would pick up women and kill them. And he claims he's killed 50 to 60 people, and he was going to do a global resolution and tell where all the bodies were and all this. And but I only wanted him for one case in Harris County. And I got enough of a confession out of him to close the case, but our prosecutors would not file charges because he was already facing multiple life sentences in 2 or 3 states, in Utah and Illinois. And that's where I interviewed him, was in the state prison in Pontiac, Illinois. My partner Eric and I, we were headed to Michigan on another case, and we stopped in Pontiac to interview this guy, and he was creepy. I mean, you hear about people with dead eyes and no soul. This guy was the poster child. I mean, the only reason he got caught is his 18-wheeler in a rest stop, the tires were over the white line or the yellow line in the parking area, and a trooper went up to the cab to wake him up where he assumed he was sleeping and asked him to move his truck over out of the lane of traffic. And as he's approaching the car, there's a lady in there screaming, and he's got a torture chamber set up in his cab sleeper with hooks and chains and pliers and needles and just horrible, horrible. And just as he approaches the car, she's screaming in there for her life. And he bangs on the car, and the guy comes out, and he's got a gun in his waistband, and it could have went really bad, but he was trying to play it off because he didn't know the trooper had heard the screams. And the trooper, tackled him, took him to the ground. In that case, brought in the FBI due to the trucking and the interstate murders. And they found he kept keepsakes and photos and souvenirs. And one of them was a 14-year-old girl out of Pasadena, Texas, just east of Houston. And he had picked her and her boyfriend up, killed the boyfriend, and then tortured her for months. And there's pictures of her in a barn in Utah. I believe that's where he got that death sentence. And tied up in the barn, and he had shaved her head and put a dress on her and was making her call him mommy. So this guy's got some issues. Anyway, Robert Ben Rhodes, that was the first serial killer I interviewed, and I got him to talk about my case in a hypothetical. And the DA said, that's enough. If he didn't have these life sentences, he just gave away details of the case that only the killer would know. And I had to tell the husband, hey, this is the guy. This is who killed your wife. She got away from him, met him at a bar. She was cheating on her husband. They were having problems, and he picked her up and took her to this area near the trucking yard in his personal car while his 18-wheeler was parked nearby, and she escaped naked out of the car. He had already been cutting on her, and he ran over her while she's running down the street and killed her. He went and parked the car. It was a rental car. No, it was his car. Parked it at the airport, and they recovered hair and blood and things off the underside of the car. And it met the profile of him, and it happened a quarter mile from where he worked. And I got his truck log. The FBI had his logs. Truckers have to log their hours, and he pulled into Houston for a dentist appointment 8 hours prior and then left the next day. And he was a nationwide trucker, and he was right there, So we put together a case, and we were able to close it what's called exceptional. That means you know who did it, but either the suspect's dead or you can't file charges. And we couldn't file charges because they wouldn't take it. They weren't going to extradite him back to Houston for a trial when he already had 2 life sentences or whatever. So. And the other one, I don't want to get too personal because I'm really close with my uncle, but his first wife was killed, murdered by a serial killer, Tommy, I think his name, Danny Paul Bible, last name Bible of all things. And he had killed family members, and he had killed ladies and girls all over the country. And just horrible luck, he was visiting some family in Houston, staying in somebody's house, and so my uncle's first wife went in the house to borrow their phone. She was kind of friends with the girl that lived there, and he liked her, and he followed her, and he killed her, made her a victim, posed her body on the side of a bayou in north side of Houston. And that case there, that's not why I interviewed him. I interviewed him about another case. But that case there was solved by the cold case guys that were in cold case when I was in robbery, some other guys. And that's when I saw that. That's what made me know there was a cold case unit and what they did, you know. I knew there was one, but I didn't really pay attention to it because I knew I had to go to homicide to get to the cold case unit, and I didn't want to do that. And so, long story short, I went down and talked to those guys and said, "Hey, that victim," and named her, you know, and I told them my connection. And my cousin was her daughter, a 1-year-old daughter. She was 1 year old when her mom was murdered, you know, and she lives about an hour away. Anyway, that connection put it in the back of my mind, man, I sure would. It would be worth going to homicide for a few years just to get to work cold case. And then I quickly put it out of my mind. And, but anyway, I had to interview Danny Paul Bible again. He was on death row for my aunt's case. He's in a Texas prison, I think the Polunsky unit, which is in Livingston, not too far from here. He was on death row. Montana investigators thought he killed 3 high school girls back in the 80s, late or early 80s, that were camping, like, well, I'm gonna say Yellowstone River, but it was something like that. Beautiful camping area, state park. And he killed a couple girls so that he could sexually assault and torture this one that he liked. He had a profile. And so I had to interview him. And of course, the whole time I'm thinking I want to come across the table, you know, and gouge this guy's eyeballs out and feed them to him one at a time through his nostrils. But I had to, you know, remain professional. And because if he found out, you know, the connection to that victim, then he would just have a blast, you know. And a lot of these guys they get sexually aroused when you talk about their cases, you know, and it's crazy. You know, they can't control themselves, you know, stick their hand around the table or they start breathing heavy, you know. And there were a couple cases where we were just physically ill at the way people were acting when you talk about these cases. But anyway, he wouldn't admit to it. He admitted to being in Montana around that time. Didn't do anything wrong. Just trying to find a job, moving from construction site to construction site. And anyway, you could just tell though when I talked about the campsite and the girls, you know, that he sat up straight. You know, just before he was like,
Wow.
But you can't file charges based on that.
Yeah.
He was on death row anyway for killing. Yeah. So, yeah. A lot of prison trips for witnesses. A lot of prison trips for suspects. I had to let a suspect put his arm around me in a chokehold in a prison to get him to continue his lie about how the victim pulled a gun. We couldn't get this guy to confess, but then we fed him. You can lie to the crooks. We fed him the fact that, well, that guy had a gun on him. I mean, could be self-defense, you know, but unless you tell us the story, we're just going to have to probably just file our charges, you know. And this guy was about to get out on a 10-year sentence for 3 different aggravated assault deadly weapons. And anyway, so we let him reenact how he decided that was a good avenue to go with self-defense. So, you know, we searched him real good and moved all the ballpoint pens and everything, but we needed him to show us what he did, you know. How he was just trying to take the guy's chain and wallet, and this guy pulled a gun on him. This was an old man just trying to get into a parking spot at the store, and the guy wouldn't move, so he hit his horn. So this guy went to kill him for honking the horn at him. And the guy took off and was dragging the suspect in the car. And then he pulled his gun and shot the guy while he's driving away and murdered this grandfather and father. And we got a confession out of him in a prison cell or a conference room while he was preparing to get out of prison and go home. He had served his, you know, he was getting out on parole. So he had served like 8 out of 10 years or whatever. And we got a confession out. It was very satisfying because we left there, called the DA. He never left. He's still there.
Wow.
But,
Okay. Couple last questions for you. And just for the audience, look, Bobby had a hell of a career. He ended up getting promoted to lieutenant, went to the jail, did a year at CSU, then went to lieutenant for the homicide unit. They had a clearance rate of 90%, which is unbelievable. Ends up retiring after 30 and a half years. But a couple of the last questions I have for you is, as you're working in that cold case unit, you end up going back and getting your master's in criminal justice, leadership, and management. Why'd you do that? Why'd you go back?
Around the time, and I don't think we touched on it, but they took away the detective rank in 2007, and they forced everybody to become a sergeant. And there was a lot of reasons for that, mainly so they could transfer you if they didn't like you. But if you were a detective, they couldn't transfer you anywhere out of the detective bureau. So they had a lot of troubled, lazy, worthless detectives. Not a lot, but a few. And they could do nothing with them. So they made everybody a sergeant. Now, if you pissed them off, they would send you to the jail or to patrol and get you out of investigations and backfill your spot with somebody who deserved it. And I actually kind of agreed with it, but a lot of people were mad because detective was kind of a prestigious rank. You were kind of a supervisor. You made the same money as a sergeant, same pay. But as a detective, you had to wait 7 years to take the lieutenant's test. As a sergeant, you had to wait 2 years. And so whenever they made a sergeant, it kind of put in the back of my mind, hey, I don't know if I'm going to do this investigative thing for another 10, 12 years, because I knew I needed to probably do 30 at least to get a decent pension. So it started, and then things started happening in the cold case unit. My partner left, Eric left, and went back to regular homicide to be a squad sergeant, supervise a team of 5 or 6 detectives. And I was by myself in cold case. They decided not to fill Eric's spot. And I don't know if there was a sheriff change. We had a lot of turnover. I went through probably 5 sheriffs during my career. Different sheriffs put different emphasis on cold case. Some of them loved it and would help you get money and grants and cars and overtime, and some of them could care less. They would rather see you back in robbery or homicide, helping clear up those cases. Because previous cold case teams may have only solved 1 or 2 or 3 a year. Eric and I, we did 9 to 15 some years. I mean, it was crazy. And I think it was just, I wouldn't say it was all us. I think it was just a new approach and new technologies and just our attitude going into it, talking to people. But long story short, if it's not too late for that, I knew I needed to get some supervisor experience. At this point, I had only supervised either one civilian clerk or a caseload. That was my supervisor experience, and I'm a sergeant, and I've only supervised myself for the most part. So I started putting out feelers to some friends of mine that were higher ups, and was like, hey, what do I need to do to get a supervisory sergeant position instead of an investigative? And so me and a friend worked a deal with the major over the bureau. He wants to go to cold case, and I need a supervisor job because I'm going to take the lieutenant's test. So I went to child abuse. We swapped. He was a child abuse sergeant over a team of detectives and our investigators, and I was in cold case supervising myself. And we swapped. A lot of people said I was stupid, and I thought I was stupid for a while. But yeah, I worked child abuse, supervising some great investigators. But the best part of that job was what tied into me getting the master's degree, is I always wanted to teach or instruct. And I had taught some classes in the Marine Corps, land navigation, weapon stuff. I enjoyed teaching it, even though I was shy, but with my group of guys, I could teach. And then when I got in trouble at the jail and I had that degree, I was putting together PowerPoints and teaching how to file charges in the jail and how to investigate this or that. When you have an assault in jail, you don't need to call a patrolman to come downtown. You're a certified peace officer. Why are you going to call a patrolman or a Houston police officer? You're a damn Texas cop. You need to know how to file charges, and nobody knew how. So I wrote a lesson plan, and somebody made it mandatory. You need to call Bobby Minchew and get on his list. He's teaching classes, once a week. And I taught hundreds of people in the jail that were certified peace officers that had never arrested anybody, except maybe on an extra job at a bar, and they just held them until the real police got there. But anyway, so I knew that I had a knack, or not a knack, but an inclination to teach. I enjoyed it. And when I got that master's degree, I immediately got a job at Lone Star Community College and taught criminal justice for 7 years as my side job. I taught, I taught in the police academy that they had, and then I taught intro to criminal justice, criminal investigation, fundamentals of criminal law, constitutional stuff, just a variety of criminal justice classes to undergraduates, And I really enjoyed it. And then I don't remember why I stopped doing that after 7 years, but well, I do, but it's a long story about the college management. I butt heads with people. Anyway, so I don't know if I answered your last question. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. Look, I got 3 last questions for you. Looking back on your career, would you do anything different?
Well, I would like to say I wouldn't have been an idiot when I was younger, but I think all that led to me having a good career. I don't think I would have appreciated what I had and what I did if I hadn't been through what I had been through as a young patrolman and a jailer. And so, no, I mean, yeah, I would like to say, yeah, I wouldn't have done this. I wouldn't have got in trouble. I wouldn't have got sent back to the jail or whatever. But, everything, I had a spiritual reawakening when I got sent back to the jail. Not only was I doing homework while I was supposed to be watching the inmates, I was also reading the Bible and talking to God, praying to Jesus, and things just started getting better. Not to proselytize on your podcast, but that's what I needed at that time. And without being shaken, and slapped around a little bit, I may have never woken up, and just continued to live the juvenile attitude that I had. It's all about me, and everybody's out to get me, and I'm the only one that knows what I'm doing in this 4,000 man department. I went from that to trying to, man, I've got some hard earned lessons in this department, and in the military and in life, and I tried to mentor people. I tried to both at the college where I taught, there were a lot of people that wanted to be police officers, and I would take the time and stay after class. I just wanted to pass on all this hard-earned knowledge and lessons and not let it go to waste, and just disappear into the atmosphere. If I can pass on some of that stuff to the younger generations. And and in the cold case unit, we got to sit down with families and kids, and that was part of why I say it was the best job, was just and I hate the word closure, because there is no closure when your loved one gets, everybody says, oh, well, at least they got closure. No, they wake up every day and their kid's still not there, or their husband's still not there. But, it helps that there was a little bit of justice, or you figured out who did it, or whatever. So, yeah, a great career. I don't think I would change anything, to be honest. If knowing what I know, obviously at the time, I can't believe I'm in the jail. If I could take that back.
How did law enforcement affect your family?
Negatively and positively. We talked about the big reset, and it was hard on my kids, hard on my first wife. A lot of work, and it was never good times. It was never Monday through Friday, 8 to 4. I was always on night shift, or the power shift, the worst shift ever, 7 p.m. to 3 a.m., with 3 days off, which was good. But, I mean, my kids suffered, and then you throw a divorce on top of that. I'm so proud of how my kids turned out, really blessed. And their mom did a good job keeping everything together for them. And then I married my soulmate, and had another kid, and she's off in college. Everything's good. Life is good. I'm 55 years old. I retired at 52. I took another job almost immediately with a tech company. I worked 2.5 years with a law enforcement related tech company, using AI type software to monitor jail and prison phone calls, and developing leads and confessions and tips for agencies all over the country. I did that until it became too time consuming. And now I play around on my new tractor, I feed the deer and the hogs. We have chickens. We've raised domestic hogs. We've had quail, rabbits. We're taking a break from all that right now. And we're just doing fishing trips. We're going to Arkansas next week for trout and walleye fishing in the Ozarks. And just living our best lives.
How did law enforcement, I mean, you've been retired for a little while now. How did law enforcement affect the way that you see people? I mean, you were in the child unit, you were in the cold case unit, you dealt with people on patrol. Can you look back and how did that affect the way that you see people?
I became very cynical. I always thought somebody had an angle, or I didn't trust a lot of people. Didn't have a lot, like most police officers, didn't have a lot of friends that weren't in the police business. It does become a problem, and that's one of the reasons the wife and I fled Harris County as soon as we could. Mm-hmm. We actually bought this property several years before we retired because we knew because I couldn't drive anywhere without saying, "Oh, worked a robbery there, worked a teacher raped a girl in that parking lot, or a guy was killed here, officer involved shooting here, and one of my guys got shot there." I mean, just that was because we were living in Northeast Harris County, and that's where I worked robbery, and that's where I patrolled, and and a lot of my cases ended up there when I was an investigator. So everywhere was a memory.
Has it gotten better though since you retired? Does it dissipate over time, or it's always there? It's kind of a jaded view.
I think it dissipated from moving out here to a 10 miles outside of a town of 500 people. And I get nervous when I get south of like Huntsville, which is only 50 miles away, headed towards Houston. And that was part of the reason I left that really good tech job. It paid well, but I don't like traveling to Houston. And I was an account manager for Harris County, Brazoria County, Galveston, Fort Bend, all these counties down there, right where the crime is just, I enjoyed teaching. I would train officers how to use our software to build their cases, but just driving through traffic, I just want to rip somebody's, never mind. It's just peaceful out here. You can look out my back porch right now and see why I don't want to leave.
Yeah, you got a hell of a spread, that's for sure. Okay, last thing. Let's talk about your YouTube channel. It's called the KCA Ranch and Homestead. Tell the viewers what it's about.
Well, when I was going through cancer, we can go back to when my dad died of cancer. He had a little bit of money, not much, but he divided it between us 6 kids. And he said to me, at my house, he came to my house and was passing out these little checks, He said, "Buy you some land. That's the only thing that's going to make you happy," And so we held on to that money. And then I got cancer. And some friends of mine I'm on a bow hunting forum, TexasBowhunter.com. Shout out to the TBHers. They came up with the term, "Hey, Bobby, KCA, kick cancer's ass." That's what KCA was. And I mean, if you drive into my gate, I've got a sign that says KCA Ranch. I've got on our well house, little kitchen area, it says KCA. My YouTube channel is KCA Ranch and Kick Cancer's Ass. It just kind of grounds me and reminds me of what I've been through. And there were times where I thought cancer was going to kick my ass. And I went to war with it, and that's just the attitude you got to have when you face a problem is I hate to say it, don't let doctors dictate to you what's going to happen. Don't let oncologists and chemo people tell you what's going to happen. And don't let anybody tell you what your odds are going to be of survival. I never had a doubt that I was going to beat cancer. I just didn't know how bad it was going to whip my ass during the fight. But I never had a doubt.
Yeah.
And I feel like my dad was overwhelmed because by the time they caught his, it was already in his liver and lungs, and he was already so bad off that he didn't get a chance to do that. And he would have fought because he was a fighter. And, but I was like, I got 5 kids. I got these grandkids now. I think I'm up to 12 with one on the way, KCA is just my motto and my wife's motto because she got me through it more than I did. I told her, never let me feel sorry for myself, never let me get down. And if I act like I'm, depressed or whatever, just remind me, KCA.
Yeah.
And that's the way we live our life on everything.
Thanks, Bobby. Really appreciate the interview.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming all the way from Idaho.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we're going to be up that way. I may be chasing one of these elk,
All right.
so I'll have to stop by and see you.
Yep. Come see me. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.